Welcome to the Voices of Impact podcast, where we engage in spirited discourse on the world's most pressing issues with the goal to discover and implement solutions. We are an ambitious youth group, and we will not settle until we have tackled every challenge our world faces.
Previous generations have left us with a host of issues, but the world is ours. Join us as we learn life lessons and how to contribute to a more fair and uplifting planet. We will take the torch from older generations, learning from their mistakes.
We will glean wisdom from the experiences of adults who tried to prevent us from ending up with the issues that we face today, as well as the experiences of adults who, to this day, stand alongside us, fighting the southward progression of many spiraling dilemmas.
Tune in weekly as we approach these many quadrants through the lens of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, for the planet. Voices of Impact is brought to you by the University of San Diego's Jacobs Institute for Innovation in Education, PPC Profit Pros, and Schoolcast, a Cloudcast media program to empower the voices of young students around the world.
Hello, listeners. We're back with another episode from the Voices of Impact Digital Studio. I'm Shane.
I'm Isabella.
I'm Jim, and this is Voices of Impact Season 2.
Now, Jim and I recently went on the Spotlight on the Community podcast with Mr. Drew Schlossberg, which is the nation's longest-running community podcast. You should definitely check out the show to uncover the grassroots social, economic, and cultural projects that underpin the San Diego community.
So on the same podcast, we talked about our interview with Ricardo, a brave young man who fled Venezuela during the Maduro administration, whom we interviewed on our last podcast episode.
This is a compelling start to a second season. Definitely give it a listen if you haven't already.
I know, it was awesome. Too bad you couldn't be there, Isabella. You were in Iowa. So we were chatting with Mr. Schlossberg about the future of Voices of Impact. And he got us thinking we could interview our teachers because they know better than anyone how to empower students to make an impact, which is kind of what we want to do here with the show.
And so we're doing it. Today, one of our guests, we have Mr. Rasmuson, colloquially known as Mr. Raz, which we'll be referring to him as throughout the podcast. He's one of our favorite teachers, probably of all time. We thoroughly enjoyed his class the last school year, and he is quite the conversationalist, and he is a history buff.
He's not just interested in history. I mean, Mr. Rasmussen, he reads philosophy books, history books, books on society, and he's happy to go deeper with students on anything they're interested in for long conversations, and he'll even generate impromptu lectures on whatever you're asking about.
Yeah, and when he's not passionately gesticulating about the effects of the Second Industrial Revolution, he's reenacting the Civil War or playing Magic the Gathering. How's it going, Mr. Raz?
Hello. Nice to be here. Definitely don't play Magic the Gathering that much anymore, but I do occasionally. But definitely glad to be here.
Sounds great.
And today, I brought on my favorite teacher of all time, Mr. Jason Franzenburg, or as we all call him, Mr. Franz. We are so thrilled to have him today in the studio because he's just one of a kind. He's the kind of educator who turns just standard STEM concepts into actual life-changing global initiatives that just affect everyone.
And from what you've told me, Mr. Franzenburg, he goes way further than just robots and CAD. He took ideas from the students at Project Lead the Way to the global stage. He gave lectures at Harvard, and he was leading a team to develop sustainable water filtration systems over in Muamba in Kenya. I think he really takes the time to prove to his students that designs can have a massive impact right now.
Yeah, and when he's not orchestrating the controlled chaos of a first robotics build session, which includes competitions like FTC and FRC, he's busy rapidly manufacturing thousands of face shields for his district during a pandemic. How is it going, Mr. Franz?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's going great. Summer's off to a good start, and
coming up with some new ideas for this year. So thanks for having me.
It's great to have you both on the show. There are many ways to approach social change, but today we mainly want to focus on the toolkit we need to adapt and how to make a difference. So we've mainly broken this down into three main topics. Number one is empowering student action. The second one is a historical framework for understanding society and its impact. And the third one is an engineering framework.
But before we get started, let's have some fun with the guests. Who has a fun question to get us started?
I'll get us started. All right. So just to warm us up, what is the major difference you guys have noticed from when you guys were in high school and the current state of secondary education in America today?
Do you want to start? You've been probably teaching longer than me.
Technology. There's just more and more tech, and now with the emergence of AI, it's like, how do we incorporate this and use it as a tool, get ahead of the game, be ethical with it? And I mean, that's just the next frontier, right? And we're in the midst of it. So technology is huge. The kids are pretty much the same. Everyone says, well, this next generation is going to be worse than the last one and the last one and the last one. But I just don't believe that to be true. They surprise me every day. The young people have a little bit different mindset. But overall, the kids are the same. If you just folks communicating, my number one goal every year is communication. Let's figure out how to communicate together. Then we can overcome a lot of challenges and, just different perspectives. I grew up with the internet, and I'm one of those kids that drank out of the water hose and, did silly stuff, and we didn't have this safest environment as we do nowadays. But so I've got to see a lot of change. This is just finished my 25th year teaching, and I'm looking forward to the next 10 with this young people.
It's interesting to hear your perspective a little bit on that too. But for me, haven't been teaching nearly as long. I've only been teaching around 5.5 years, and I do feel like I do notice a difference though. And I agree with you. I think kids don't really change that much. And there's this kind of tendency of always blaming the newest generation for some new social ill or whatever. But I do think on a certain level, what I have noticed from my own high school experience, and who knows, maybe there's a little bit of cloud of my judgment of the kinds of kids I interact with, and who knows. But I do think, and there are studies to show this too, that one of the concerning things I find with newer generations is kind of literacy in various ways, and the amount that people are reading and how people consume information. And I think a lot of that does have to do with technology, which is kind of a little bit related to what you were just talking about in terms of the changes in technology. Because obviously I do think that these changes in technology can be huge boons to society in a lot of ways, but also think that, as you were kind of implying a little bit too, I think can also be possibly lead to also negative outcomes, I think, in terms of how students interact with and engage with them. And so I think that's kind of my big thing, is that I feel like there's been a slight reduction in like attention spans and ability to absorb longer texts. And this is something there's been a decent amount of articles and studies discussing this as a change. And so I do think that's the big change I've noticed. Not to say that I'm trying to blame students and be like, oh, like you're bad for this, but I think there are structural reasons why it's kind of moved this way. And there's institutional problems and possibly even problems with in terms of how parents are parenting, but also larger structural problems, I think, even beyond that explain some of those differences. And so I do think there is a difference, I would say, in my head at least.
Yeah. Raz, one thing on that too is what I agree with you 100%. We just had an advisory meeting with a lot of the local employers, and what we're coming back to is going back to the basics, which you're calling literacy. And we need very foundational skills at the math level, because technologies can certainly be a distraction. But that is one of the biggest changes, is how do you embrace it? Can you embrace it? To what level? So is it changing kids? Certainly. In the end, I think it's best to keep it simple with human beings. If we can find the right balance of ethics and lessons and technology, would be an ideal world. Will mistakes be made? Certainly. And it's how do we overcome some of those? So I agree with you. I have noticed a difference on that front. There are changes, but in the end, for me, after 25 years, they're still kids.
Yeah.
I guess that's sort of was my perspective.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty simpleton, but yeah, we can go a little deeper if we
for
need
sure.
to.
Sure. I don't know. Throwing the negative approach here, but I don't know. But like, I don't know. I have a very critical analysis of things, and I feel like that is how I
Oh,
drive a lot of my thought process. So I try to find the critiques and criticisms and things. But no, I do agree with you on a fundamental level that they're kids at the end of the day, and you can't blame kids for the conditions they're in. You know.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And super cool to hear from both of you kind of talking back and forth on that. From my perspective, when you read a book, it both decreases the chance that you'll be, indoctrinated by it, and it also increases the chance that you'll be able to form a better opinion by that information. I think that we can kind of safely contend with even dangerous information if we're reading it long form and we have kind of the opportunity to think about it as opposed to it persistently showing up on our feed.
Exactly. Also, when you consume information online, it gets sucked up into the algorithm, and you have a higher likelihood of getting sucked into echo chambers. But it's not the same when you're reading a book.
This ties well into our first segment, empowering student action. Often, students feel like they have to wait until graduation to actually make a real difference or to, make new innovations. So, with you guys having that experience and that background of different students, how do you think teachers can empower students to create an impact right now and not wait till later or think they just have to wait till they're older to actually make a change?
I teach Project Lead the Way curriculum. I'm a core training instructor. So I also train adults in the summer how to teach some of the engineering coursework. Um, the thing I love about Project Lead the Way and is it's project based. So we get to identify projects and then teach the content that we need to um, throughout the project, which makes it relevant for students. I think relevancy in a project helps that connection with the student, um, because it just really depends how you're going to differentiate instruction to each student. There's so many different personalities in the room with the kids, so it's difficult to empower every single student in the room all the time. If you find a good project that we can all come to a common vision on, I really think it helps. So, just differentiation, understanding who your students are the best you can, um, is the foundation for empowering them. But if we can find a worthy project, you mentioned the Kenya Water Project. That one was amazing as well because it's like, can we actually save a life here? If we can clean water, who's not on board for that? And when you have everyone go in the same direction, um, and that's why robotics is great as well. Is if everyone's going the same direction, it's easy to empower them. Some days are going to be tough. Um, one of my sayings, which I'm not overly proud of, but I say it is, good luck with that. And I tell the kids that means I believe in you. You're allowed to make some mistakes, and let's figure this out along the way. Like you can do it. Let's take a step, and that may empower a student, and then they may become frustrated, and sometimes I have to explain to them what it means. Well, so but the thing that brings it all together is finding projects that the students are going to be engaged in.
This is a interesting topic for me. I think it's interesting because you have a lot of very tangible things that you work on, and I feel like a lot of the ways that I'm engaging with students are a little bit more abstract in terms of concepts and ideas and thinking critically about things. And in terms of in my class, I try to engage with material in a way that gets students to think critically about things. I do try to ask questions of students to get them to think critically about things, to and perhaps, maybe I should have more discussion and things like that. We do have discussion in my class for sure. But sometimes I do feel like that there should be more of it. I do think I have a interesting relationship specifically with Shane and Jim over here, and that they're also involved with other things that I've been involved with on campus, such as like the political science club, which there's a lot more interaction with the students have with each other and have a lot more kind of a critical discussion back and forth. But a lot of my class is me trying to just discuss the history in a way that hopefully is informative and hopefully has them think about the concepts. And I try to go a little bit beyond just the base level. Here's what happened, and try to talk about the implications of what this means and what that might mean for us. And again, I don't know to what extent that always seeps through for students. And so I am a little bit curious to even hear from you guys, Jim and Shane, about what you think of some of the things that I've discussed in my class. Because I've talked to some students that I feel like have gotten a lot out of things. But in terms of making a difference in that sense, I think you have to have a certain level of critical thinking and abstract thinking about things to kind of think about where the lines even can be drawn and how can we make a difference. I think one thing that is a difficult concept for me is that I even sometimes debate in my head the best way that I can make a difference. And so it's interesting to discuss. I think I'm constantly trying to think of ways to make a difference, but I even question myself if I've done the most I can do to make a difference in the world. I think it is something that we have to flesh out ourselves. I do think on a certain level, there's a certain degree to which you need human connection and human people coming together and working together in a collective action for change to happen. Like, I don't think as a sole individual we could like chart our way towards making change. I think a lot of change happens in groups, and I hope students kind of at least absorb some of that, some of the things that we've discussed in class, and through the interactions with each other and through our ways of thinking about different things. Um, and as you mentioned, of course, student relationship is just very important. Talking to students and encouraging them to be able to think about things. I do try to talk about history even at the very start of every school year. Something that isn't just because a lot of people do think about history as kind of an abstract thing that's just a series of events that have already happened. And it's like, oh, like you are passerbyers, like you're kind of just sitting there, you're a bystander to history. Like, it's just something that happens and you witness it. But I try to get students to think about, at least to some degree, about how, we are actors within history. The actions that we take play a role. And obviously, on a certain level, the actions that I take are not making as big of a difference as, say, the president or other figures. But I do think people like myself and like everyone here in larger groups can make huge, differences on the historical stage. And that's something that I do talk a lot about in the context of when I taught European history, in terms of some of the various movements that were triggered by just ordinary people, whether it was peasants or random workers or et cetera, or even things like the American Revolution, which we're reaching, the 250 year, this year is the 250 year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and how, yes, at first it was these major figures, the Washingtons and the Jeffersons, et cetera, that were pushing for this. But on a certain level, it became beyond that. It became something that was a mass movement. And in that sense, all of us can play a role in history if we look for the opportunities to. But it's also, I think, difficult for people to see themselves in that role. They think of history as just something that happens, but not as something that we like participate in and can affect.
I think a history class is inherently a bit less active than an engineering class or robotics where you're literally making stuff with your hands on a team. But at the same time, one of the ways that Mr. Raz, that you're able to get us involved and engaging with the material is that you teach everything in a fun way that's very accessible to us, not just like we're reading slides based on a textbook, but like with memes and whatnot, and songs and different things that allow us to kind of see past events in the framework of how we see the current world. And that allows us to understand the material in a way that we can then apply it to the world right now.
Exactly. And touching further upon that, Mr. Raz, he likes to incorporate a lot of current events in our class lectures, and he's very caught up with what's happening in the world right now. Like, I remember the day after Maduro got kidnapped, he gave a whole spiel on it in class, and he also tied in what we were learning about the Middle East with the current war in Iran. So he's making a lot of these connections for us, and he's helping us see that like history has a lot of these common threads, and helping us see kind of these patterns that could help further our historical understanding of the past and the present.
So you guys are kind of trying to incentivize your students to either learn more about the subject, whether it's history or engineering, but most importantly, kind of like internalize the information and not just learn facts, but kind of be able to apply that knowledge to everyday life in whatever decisions they are making. So what kind of like advice would you guys give to like young listeners in this podcast that are deciding like what interests to like pursue?
Isabella, I would say you have to like, where are the opportunities? Um, for the best thing that your listeners can do as young people too is, just be engaged the best you can. It's hard at times. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of distractions. History, we're making history right now, like Mr. Raz says, and I like that he's, you know, you can see patterns in history as well. There's so many demands for your students. Um, I know you are a cheerleader. You're going to be captain of our robotics team. You're doing a podcast. Your studies are amazing. You maintain excellent grades. You balance a very healthy home life. I've met your family and your parents. There's a lot of demands, and it's hard to be engaged at times. So, I mean, that's my best advice. And try a lot of things. You know, if we just said, "Hey, be part of the robotics team," and that's it, no, just try a lot of things and talk to people and meet people and keep an open mind. You know, when you're there in the moment, you can accomplish a lot.
For sure. That great advice there. I think maybe to add on to a little bit of that, and I agree with everything that you're going to say too. And I think you made a good point too about, thinking about what you're passionate about, but also looking for opportunities. And when you discuss like being engaged, I think for me, and this is like a very specific piece of advice, but it's been something that's helped me a lot as a person. And I feel like it was even alluded to some degree, even I think by either Jim or Shane earlier. But I think when you talk about being engaged, I do think that means meeting and discussing and finding, you know, discussing ideas with lots of people around you. And I think it's good to do that on a in-person basis. I think a lot of like online discourse, online discussion can be helpful and has been helpful for me. I still am online a lot and like discussing things with people and learning from the internet. But I do think meeting people in person and kind of throwing ideas at them is helpful. Like it's one thing to kind of develop your ideas and think about things on an individual basis. And you can go pretty far with that, obviously. You can think about things on a very deep level and understand things. But I feel like for me, an actual dialectical process where there's a discussion back and forth made me more worldly in some ways. And I feel like it has helped me shape about like what I want to do and how I want to go about things in my life. And so, I don't want to take like credit for all of my teaching as even my ideas, like a lot of the stuff that I come up with and pushed were through discussions and through interactions with other people. Like, Jim Shane, obviously, in my class that we play like various games and stuff at various points to kind of illustrate historical concepts. I had a peer who was another teacher in my teaching credential program who kind of just like briefly mentioned that idea of doing some things like that in his class. And I found it like really interesting when I asked him for some details on it. And I never ended up using a single one of the games that he designed, but just him mentioning that helped spur a lot of my ideas. And so I'm always trying to talk to people that I think know more than me about various things or that have certain insights that I don't have and try to learn and adapt from that. And I think that's one thing that I think does worry me a little bit about some of the younger generations is I feel like a lot of the discussion and interaction and social interaction in general happens mediated through kind of a digital screen to some extent. And I think having conversations, even like we're having right now, but just in general, having conversations where you see people face to face and have a discussion about things does change your perspective a lot. And I forget which of you guys mentioned this, but someone mentioned how I'm always giving some anecdote about some random person I talk to in my classes when I'm teaching a lesson. And it's because I go out of my way to talk to people all the time. And I'm a little bit of a maniac about it, and I understand if you're a little more introverted, it's a little harder to do this, but I do try my best to just talk to random people. Like I will, if someone's mentioning something on the street that is of interest to me, I will go up to them and ask them about it because I want to learn. I want to always be learning and talking, interacting. I think we need to pursue knowledge as something that is socially construed. And I think one thing that's been very interesting to me when I think about AI as a concept and what AIs generate is like they're taking the sum of a lot of human knowledge and kind of like collating it into like a list of like key things. And I think people kind of forget that knowledge itself and that a lot of human creative potential is not individual. It's building upon the labor and like activities and creative processes of hundreds, thousands, millions of people in the past. And that human knowledge isn't an individual thing. It's all of our creative endeavors are the process of so much. And once I started kind of seeing the world that way, it's hard to kind of claim ownership of like, oh, I'm so good at doing this thing, teaching or this or that. It's like, no, I'm building upon so much that has been provided to me by others. And so I think for me, teaching is itself a way to build that framework for other people, for students to be able to take that and build something upon that. And I don't know, I just think human knowledge itself functions that way. And I think it's kind of a beautiful thing.
When you're talking to a lot of different people because you're trying to aggressively learn as much as possible about different topics, it can be a bit overwhelming. Like there will be someone who's complaining about really high taxes, or someone who's talking about different crises. Just this year alone, there were 150,000 tech layoffs. The global energy grid is straining under a $2.3 trillion transition. On one hand, it's good to be aware of this massive breadth of knowledge, and information is collaborative, but it can be easy to feel overwhelmed. So how should we actually focus our efforts?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think I think it kind of depends how you want to go about things in a certain sense. Like you don't have to pay attention to everything, right? You can choose specific things and specialize and be really specifically leaning on whatever is of interest to you. Like I'm sure, obviously, Franzenburg here knows way more about engineering than I do. Like I know very little. And, obviously I assume I know more about certain aspects of history. Obviously you can specialize, but I think it's just always worth being open to hearing things if it does come up. You don't have to go out of your way to hear every single little thing, but I'm always open in conversations to kind of understanding where someone's coming from. And even when you disagree with people, I think it's interesting to see the reasoning for why they believe the things they do, or see how their experiences shaped why they believe the things that they do. And for me, that's always like an interesting process. And I'm very interested in the process of trying to understand why people act the way they do, and how societies function, and how like groups of people can come together, or how groups of people can fall apart. Like I'm very interested in those human processes. And so for me, I am trying to see how humans react to things. But that's just because that's interesting to me, right? And and so that might make it a little bit easier for me to have these conversations with so many people. But that's my thought on it. I know it is a chaotic. I kind of thrive in the chaos, I think, and so maybe I'm unique in that sense. Is I like that chaotic splurge of things and interactions with people. Like I like talking to random people that like I disagree with a lot. Like that's fun for me. Like I enjoy seeing and understanding those things. I'm not saying everyone has to do that. You can obviously fixate and narrow in on something that you're really interested in.
Um, you know, I love thriving in the chaos. That's the robotics room. I met an artist in Iowa City, and his dad was really famous, and it's a famous artist. And man, I wish I could recall the name too. It was on just another a great experience. But we got to go to his home, and his home was a piece of art. I mean, like hidden doorways. It was just like it was amazing, and the art was unbelievable. The textures, the everything that was going on. But he said something that really stood out to me. He's like, he struggled because he wants to do his art for himself and be true to him as an artist. But his dad reminded him, like, who's paying the bills? You know, um, he said, you might be able to do your own artwork for 20% of your time, but 80% of your time, you need to pay the bills. Right. So I have to produce art that other people want, that they're going to buy. And I mean, you can see my background is like engineering mindset, always working. But ultimately, it's about being kind in those personal relationships. My mom has 13 brothers and sisters. So if you didn't, it's a baby boomer generation. But growing up, like when you go to a family gathering, there's over 100 people there. And you realize how important people are. And it's like that personal time is important, but our work is important as well. Um, and I'm terrified of AI taking over our work. Uh, that's why I'm on the engineering front, and I need to learn as much about it as I can now. Um, I'm not talking about the AI where I'm just going to chat GPT, regurgitate information, because it finds all the bodies of work out there. And it just reports back. It's basically doing your Google search, but exponentially much more quick. And I try to trick it too to see if it's good, right? But what I want to learn is not that part of AI. It helps me brainstorm a little bit, gets me thinking. I'm not going to give it everything, but you can use it a different way as a tool to save you time. If I can save time, I have more personal time as well. Um, I'm still in discovery with AI, right? I'm trying to figure out what the heck's going on in this moment in history. For you guys, I think the best thing you could do with your time too, and being young is focus on those foundational skills, like Raz was saying, the literacy, the core math training. You need to know how to do it. You can't rely on AI to do everything. So don't let that shift you away. If you can start to learn how to use it appropriately, um, then kudos to you. But for me, it comes back to, I want value in people.
Guess to touch upon what both Raz and Mr. Franz was saying, these like core competencies like literacy and being able to do math is very important to be able to adapt to new skills and new innovations in the future. But also, in order to kind of like get more breadth in your understanding of these new technological horizons, you should talk to more people. You should spend time, like, for example, Mr. Franz, you talk to like the artist, for example, and then Mr. Raz obviously likes engaging in conversations with everyone. It's good to learn about different perspectives, very similar to what we're doing right now with you guys. And that way we're able to kind of understand the human element. From this, I would like to transition to a historical aspect of looking at things. Mr. Raz, I've seen you on the Falcon 5, which is this news network at our high school. And you like to discuss a lot about recent events, about geopolitics. And how specifically, I would like to ask, does your knowledge of history enhance your understanding of these current events?
Yeah, my understanding of history definitely it definitely helps in understanding current events in a lot of ways. I think one thing is that when you look at a current event, a lot of people approach it like purely as it is. Like you see the event happen and you're like, oh wow, this thing is happening, but don't understand maybe the long-standing historical reasons why developments end up the way that they do, or like how things have developed for a very long time that have built up to certain conclusions. Like when you look at think about it in our class, right? When you write a historical essay, you start your historical essay with the contextualization, where you look at like what was happening before to help introduce the topic. If you look at an event without that contextualization, you just don't understand the event in reality. Because I could look at an event that happened right now today and abstracted from anything that happened before it, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't really the reasoning and how things got this way and why things are this way don't fully make sense until you understand some of the historical background. And so, yeah, I think it's a tricky thing for people because sometimes when an event happens, I'm like, man, I have to read about something that happened 100 years ago to like fully understand, how it got this way or why things are exactly this way. Sometimes, I have to look at the U.S. relationship with a particular country and think about the U.S.'s relationship with that country historically and why things have gotten good or bad or whatever. Um, and so it's a complicated process, and understanding history is very important for understanding things that are happening in the modern day. And it's the reason why people will like kind of artificially set starting points for like when we understand a given time period or event, because framing an event start at a specific time helps you understand it differently depending on how you want to start things. Like if you look at a conflict between two countries, one country might want to focus on a specific start date because that's the start date where they had a grievance that they feel like they had to fight in this conflict to get addressed potentially. But the other country would be like, whoa, what about before that? Even before, like what about when you did this thing? And so when you choose to start talking about things, helps understand narratively, like how you understand the thing itself. And so, in terms of recent events, like I think as a simple example, if we look at right now various conflicts in the Middle East that have been happening, and I'm not going to try to go too into detail about this because I also don't want to take too much time because there's a lot of background that I have to get into to even address some of these things. Like it is worth understanding why different actors feel the way they do, whether we agree or disagree with them. It's important to understand, right? Like you can look at various Persian people in the United States and why they might have certain perspectives based on their own experiences and how that might affect their perspectives on given conflicts versus, Persian people living in Iran itself versus U.S.-Iranian relationships historically, where, the U.S. has its own grievances about things that Iran has done historically, Iran hostage crisis, there's been some incidents of, what has been seen as kind of aggression by Iran in various capacities of U.S. servicemen, even prior to recent events. But Iran also has its own grievances as well that they've had historically that go back actually to around 1953. And we talked about this in our class, obviously, that Iran had, and I know this is like, you have to do kind of an asterisk on this. It wasn't purely democratic, but Iran had democratically elected figure this Mohammad Mossadegh figure that the U.S. had a part in overthrowing. And so there's been Iranian grievances against the U.S. for a long time, even prior to them becoming the Islamic Republic that they ended up, or this Islamic, theocratic government they created. They've had grievances and distrust of America way prior. And that does inform how they think about the United States. And if we just go into this and be like, oh, why does Iran have this view? Or like, why does Iran have this intense aggression and anger towards the United States? You can disagree or agree or have any opinion on the planet about it, but it's important to understand why they have it. You have to understand it wasn't just like people woke up one day and decided I'm going to have these views. A lot of our ideas, we sometimes believe, and this kind of ties to what I was talking about earlier, a lot of our beliefs that we hold, a lot of times people think that they're just like a result of our own individual consciousness and our own idea of like, oh, I believe this because of some logical reason that I came up with. But we are exposed to different things. We're exposed to different sources, to different upbringings, to different relations with other human beings. And those things do affect ourselves and create what you can call biases or just like ways of thinking about the world. And it's important to understand that. I guess this is my point. And that like I've seen some people make arguments that just completely misunderstand a lot of the history in the Middle East and why things kind of developed the way they did, and have like zero understanding besides a very simplistic like, oh, they have these feelings about us, so I should have these feelings about them. And it's like, okay, but like let's actually look into this and think about how conflicts are resolved and think about how humans can discuss things and relate with each other. Because kind of narrowing yourself and further cementing yourself in what you already believe without even considering why people might believe things differently doesn't actually help resolve conflicts. And I think I don't know, it's just been interesting to me. I'll maybe leave it at that, but it's just been interesting to me to see how people understand geopolitics through these very narrow terms without understanding a lot of the reasons behind things.
I just want to like kind of follow up a little bit on what you said. So I think I like how you explained how different perspectives also kind of depend on beliefs. And I think it's also like a fine line between like just teaching students how to critically like think about certain topics that they're learning in class, but like also kind of understand a little bit more what's actually happening in the reasoning behind it. Like for example, in my AP HUD class, we kind of learned like the DTM, like countries going to the stage 5, but also understanding why they're going to the stage 5, population, like all of the stages behind it and how that happens. So I think it's also nice just to let students know this is happening, but it's also like why and the reasoning behind it and what happened in the past. And I want to kind of like open this up a little bit just to both of you, kind of like give your perspective on it. But how do you think we can encourage students to kind of like evaluate what's happened in the past or what has been done before and kind of innovate that in a way that they can learn from the mistakes or kind of use failures as an opportunity to grow from it and use that to just like improve in the future? Just use those like past mistakes and just like past historical um events or like past work, like prototypes that maybe people just thought didn't work, just in different, perspectives, historical versus like engineering type of thing. How do you think we can just like motivate students to just go beyond what they're learning and kind of use those critical thinking skills to just go beyond the facts?
I was going to say atomic, give the kids atomic, and then they're ready to do anything. Right? You guys have atomic out there?
A what?
The energy drink
An atomic?
that all the kids get are the energy drinks, and then they go beyond. Right? Yeah.
I just like black coffee personally.
Oh, that's what I like.
Yeah.
Isabella, I think it's like that's a hard question because
Yeah.
it's being accepting throughout. And what I see with young people as well is once you think you know something, boom, that's what it is. And then when does that perspective close? Right? It's like that's fact. And there are facts out there. So if you know it to be true, excellent. But as you go through the cycle more times and see the history cycle, right? And I don't know if Raz would agree, but what's that saying? Is history repeats itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does, and you see it the older you get. Um, like what you're sort of talking about is wisdom. Um, that we live in a very complex society. There's a lot of variables. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Try to use some patience and kindness, is what I would say. Um, because we can all sit down and argue about different things and perspectives and timetables, but history is amazing and we can learn from it. It's just when we stop learning from it is when it's like, okay, let's just do it again. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's a tricky one. Um, be curious. Just be
Yeah.
curious.
That's how I was going to answer it, actually, was with just like having intellectual curiosity, which is hard because you don't already have that. Like, I don't know exactly how to spur that besides just getting people interested in history and then having them hopefully want to look into it more. But I think having that intellectual curiosity is really important. And I think one thing that I've learned from history is that oftentimes there aren't really right answers to things. Like, it's not like things like you're saying, like history is complicated, events are complicated, there's so many variables. I feel like sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, so and so good, so and so bad. I don't like to use that kind of framing when I understand things in history because things are just very, very complicated. And it's hard to come to good solutions in terms of thinking about historical events because things are very nuanced and very difficult. And I find myself sometimes wishing there were easier answers. Sometimes I try to come to easier answers in my own head and then look into things more and I'm like, wow, like, no, like this is way more complicated than I even realized. And I guess what I would encourage people to do is to not kind of look for easy answers on things. Because one thing that I think is the problem is that people might have a stance and they feel very strongly about it. And then they feel like they almost have like a little bit of an ego in defending what they already believe.
Mm.
And it becomes difficult to see things differently once you've kind of gone on that route. I try very hard to be willing to change my own perspectives on things. This is one thing that I am specifically worried about AI is that AI, I feel like sometimes operates as like a confirmation bias machine where
Right.
it kind of confirms what you already believe. Because like if I ask AI to give me an argument for something that I already believe, it will give me a good argument on paper that like confirms what I already want to believe. And that allows you to just go deeper into that argument instead of actually critically analyzing it. Like, if anything, we should be using AI to give me arguments against what I believe, but people often do the opposite. It's like, I believe this thing, give me examples of this. Or like, and you see the extreme versions of this when people start to get delusional and they start talking with like an AI chatbot and it like confirms all of their delusions and they go in this like rabbit hole deeper and deeper. I want to hear people that contest my ideas, that make me think differently about things. Um, I want to grapple with intellectually with ideas that I'm like, oh man, I hate that. Like, I don't want to believe that. And so that it is tricky to want that because it takes a certain kind of maybe mental resilience to be willing to abandon the things that you hold dear in certain ways, and like, or maybe not even abandon, but at least threaten those things that you hold dear. But I think it's an important part of thinking critically about the world. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I do think going back to the literacy thing is the more you read, the more you know about things. Like, it's important to read a wide range of things, a wide range of perspectives to engage with history and think about like how things have built up to how they are. Um, and I don't know, like, there's a lot more to it, I think, than that, but it is a difficult question to answer in all honesty. Yeah.
As I think you said it a few times there, critical thinking, you know, and as teachers, we start with activities with you all. We may be making posters 1 minute and you're learning content, trying to make it fun. And then we're trying to get you to apply it. And then ultimately, the hierarchy is critical thinking. So, think critically.
It doesn't matter like how great a teacher teaches their students, but I think it's definitely important to just kind of engage just the student by itself, having that initiative to learn about things. I think I'm also the type of person to just go up to strangers and just ask them how their day was because I just love those kind of like in-person interactions. But those that are kind of a little bit more introverted, how can they still be engaged while, still being true to their personality, I'd say.
So I'm a pretty extroverted guy, so I do think about things more in my perspective, and I've tried to think about how introverted people can engage with things. But you can always engage with things. I do think there's no quite substitute for in-person discussion, but I also do think more introverted people, if they are thinking about things beyond just the base level of what's being said and looking into things more, like, you can always look into things more, you can always research things more, you can always read more. Um, there's always ways of engaging with things that don't necessarily involve having conversations with other human beings too. Um, and so for me, like, when I my ideal as a teacher is when I talk about a topic that after talking about it, my students don't just like hear the words I say and memorize it as like strict facts, but actually think about what it means to them. And then in an ideal scenario, actually like looking into it on their own, right? Because I think one thing that's interesting about history teaching specifically is that there is no unbiased way to teach history. Like no matter what your history teacher or anyone tells you, there's no unbiased way of teaching it. And the reason why there's no unbiased way of teaching it is that even if you teach everything that's factual, which I believe I do that. I don't teach things that are not facts. And if things are ambiguous or unclear, if there's debate about it historically, I try to acknowledge that even in class. But I try to teach things factually. But what you choose to teach is itself a biased decision because, technically everything is part of history, right? This conversation is part of history. Everything's part of history. What you choose to leave out is like just as important as what you choose to talk about.
Yeah.
And I tell my students this sometimes too, and maybe I need to emphasize it more, but I have on various occasions at the beginning of the year said this, that like, look, when I talk about this class, you are getting a biased approach from us about what I like to focus on. And obviously I'm covering a curriculum, but I kind of stray a little bit and talk about things that are tangential to the curriculum that I find interesting. But you are missing certain things. And maybe I'm only conveying one perspective of it and you're missing a different perspective. And again, because I am one individual and because there's only so much time in a school year, there are things that students do miss in my class, as it's true for all history teachers and just all history curriculums. And that's on students to kind of think about those things and look beyond that. And so, again, I know, and especially if you're not in love with history in the same way that I am, you're not going to maybe be super motivated to go out of your way to like look into all these things. But my hope is that some students, upon taking my class, are thinking about the things I'm saying and actually trying to engage with a little bit more the things I'm talking about, or look into, or even come to disagreements with what I have to say. I think that's always good. I like when students are willing to contest some of the ideas I had. I remember, I think it was with you, Shane, that we had this whole like kind of debate argument about our views on psychology or something. And I was discussing some of my perspectives and you had your own perspectives. And I like when students are willing to contest me on things because that's a good thing. It shows that they're not willing to just take what I'm saying at face value. But I also think what's interesting that you had this like impulse to be like, and I do notice these things, right? I'm mentioning some specific examples, but I do think I do think it's good when students are willing to think critically about things and be like, I don't want to just like put someone on a pedestal because someone talked about someone favorably or whatever. And so I think it's important to always take even what people in positions of authority like I am in to take what they say with a little bit of a grain of salt and skepticism, and obviously hear what I'm saying, but think deeper about it beyond what I'm just saying, and actually engage with it on your own to some degree. Because otherwise, I'm just spoon feeding you knowledge. You need to branch out, I guess, and anyone can do that, introverted, extrovert, and you can read more, you can engage more, you can look at critical lenses, different lenses, and so that's one of my suggestions. Without saying too much, I'll leave it at
I
that.
think for sure all history curriculums are limited in scope and they have to cover certain perspectives. But I think there are different levels to that too. According to a recent Penn America report, the 2024 to 2025 school year, 29% of all books banned in U.S. public schools were nonfiction, including history books and biographies, with states like Florida and Texas leading at over 4,000 combined bans. There are a lot of book bans. And I'm hoping like develop my thoughts on this because on one hand, there's the idea of keeping students safe from potentially harmful information. And then on the other hand, students should be able to expose themselves to conflicting ideas. Do you think that banning books at the high school level is helpful in some cases or should that be curbed?
Yeah, I was gonna flip that around on you guys and have you think critically about that. Why are the books being banned? Should they be? Where are they being banned?
I think a lot of it is just for political convenience for a lot of some candidates. They're running for certain parties, and a lot of them want to have what's being taught at schools align with a certain narrative. And certainly, there's a lot of just debate about how to teach touchy subjects like slavery, critical race theory, just things like that. Um, so some books may just, I don't know, like deviate too much from a narrative, and like that's why a lot of parents, a lot of school administrators just want to straight out ban them. And
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think I think so too. And what do they say? Like whoever's in power gets to write history, or whoever's in power gets to rewrite history.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
victor
winners.
history is
Yeah,
written by the victors.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
you guys know what I'm talking about. We've all heard that as well, and I think there is some of that. I would be curious from my engineering point is I want to know what percentage of those are from a political scope. Is there justification for some of these book bans? Um, you know, the books that were banned when I was young, I wanted to read them the most. You know, give me some Orwell. You know, give me some 1984. But then you do read some, and you're like, oh, well, maybe that should be banned. you know, jokingly.
Yeah.
Um, and no, I'm not trying to toe a weird line on freedom of speech because I certainly believe in that. But I have kids, okay, that are your age, and I do not want them to be exposed to certain things.
Mm.
Oh, and one of them is primarily politics. You know, when I was your age, we were worried about it, but we were nowhere near as in tune with politics as you guys are. You know what I want to do and what Raz wants to do is get you into literacy, the core concepts. Let's apply them. Let's solve problems. Let's think critically, make up our own minds. And I think you're all well on your way of that. Don't be swayed by one side or the other and think that you know what's all going on. Um, you may hit the nail on the head, but you never really know. So for me, it's like, where's it worth my time? What problems can I solve? You know, and this is my engineering brain coming into play here. It's like, okay, I had another professor say, hey, we could solve all the world's problems. We would. Let's just focus on this one that's going to make a difference, right? I think the book banning thing's more complex than we think as well. Just like anything, I'm not a fan of it, banning books at all. Um, you know, you get to decide which book you're picking up and reading. And if you don't want to read that content, you don't have to. Is some of it crazy? Yeah, it is. Um, and some of you aren't ready for that. And that's what people are trying to protect you from in some of those states, I think. You know, is it right? I don't know. I don't know if it's right or wrong. You know, I mean, this is another deep conversation. We went right in the book ban thing. That's a big one, you know. And I'm glad that you guys are concerned about it, and I can see why. And I think you have a great point, Jim. I really do.
I think I might do a bit of a reversal of what you're saying, in that I fundamentally think that I do think, the kinds of books that we're seeing in high schools, like, or within libraries or whatever. I think the vast majority of them, there's very few cases I can see in my head that it would be justified to ban them personally. And so I'm pretty, I think, not in universal, because I think there are some things that kids shouldn't be exposed to. But I think even things that might be seen as harmful by some people to children in the form of books, um, I don't think should be banned. But where maybe I differ is that I think internet access, and maybe certain social media things should be banned for students. I actually think that's a far more harmful thing than any book will be, personally. Um, and that, like, I think we need to be limiting children's access to the internet more. And I guess there might be some age gradient there on that, but I think the internet, I think, is far more harmful to children's development. Overexposure to certain things, or to certain social media things, or certain algorithms, as we discussed earlier, and confirmation bias things. I think in the case of books, like, even books that I think might be very controversial or say things that we might disagree with, I don't think I think there's a lot more critical analysis that goes in when you read a whole book, because you just have to read so much of it, and your brain has to, like, I feel like being exposed to constant tweets and posts and reels and this, I think that is more concerning to me by far than any book could be. And I think, even if you're coming about this from a conservative lens or a liberal lens, I think that's true for in both cases. If you're worried about certain ideas penetrating the minds of students in ways that you might be harmful for them, I think in both cases, whatever your perspective is, it's going to be happening more online. Like, regardless of what your specific fear is, I really just don't think that students are becoming radicalized or changed dramatically through books very much. I don't even think students are reading books enough, in my personal opinion. And so for me, I just, like, don't think. I think banning books to me is kind of out of the realm of what I think needs to be done. Um, I think the internet, though, I think, is where people go into these weird rabbit holes and end up believing really bizarre things. And I see it I mean, I feel like in my own life, I've sometimes when I got exposed more to the internet as I got older and was using the internet more, I got exposed to different ideas that looking back on, I'm like, wow, that was like a weird idea. And like looking back, I'm like, why would I have ever thought this was a good idea? And you get into online communities, you get into like, I think Discord in particular, you get into this weird social media platform where you're chatting with a bunch of people that have the exact same views in you or very, very niche views, and that becomes like a bubble that you get trapped in. I think those things are a lot scarier to me actually than any book, personally. And I think those things, because you're repeatedly getting stimuli from other people, they actually confirm your biases and confirm certain beliefs much more aggressively than anything a book could really do. And so that's my main concern, personally. And I'm not saying we should blanket ban all social media or internet or whatever too, but I do think their parents do need to be more cognizant of that and how it affects their children. I do think um, students and young people need to be more cognizant of their internet behaviors and what they're getting involved with. And I personally, I grew up in a time period where smartphones existed. And so smartphones were in my high school, like from start to finish, smartphones existed and people were using them. Um, my mom refused to get me a smartphone throughout the entirety of high school until my senior year. And so I only had a smartphone my senior year, like midway through it. And I was so annoyed by this when I was in high school because like every other student I knew had a smartphone. Um, and looking back, like I actually kind of understand why my mom did that. And looking back, like maybe that was beneficial for me to be not constantly exposed to so much stimuli all the time. And I think about it sometimes, and like if I did end up having children in the future, I feel like I would have a very firm limit on certain things. And it's hard to avoid it though, because it's so entrenched within our society now that it seems almost impossible to fully pull people out of it. But I would try my best to try to hold back a little bit more. Um, and I feel like there's even been a noticeable difference in my own thinking pre and post exposure to like even having a smartphone. And I think it's made me less productive and less intellectual. As someone that still does, try to learn a lot, like I feel like it's held me back, honestly. And it's kind of like Pandora's box a little bit. It's been opened now. Now it exists, and like, what can we do with it? It's such a tricky question. I don't really have a firm answer on it either. But that's just kind of my thoughts.
Speaking of echo chambers and religion, that's a huge issue because people indoctrinate kids with religion from a very young age. They take them to, say, church, mosque, synagogue, whatever. And that's like the biggest echo chamber you can think of. I mean, you're literally being preached to every week about what to believe and what not to believe. I think that echo chamber and the confirmation bias there is greater than anything you can find on, I don't know, your phone or books or anything like that. There is a fine line between teaching students about thinking critically on certain topics and indoctrinating them with a certain mindset. For example, in our AP US history class, a prominent example stands out when you were teaching the Civil War. You were trying to teach us how kids in the South thought about the Civil War. For example, some teachers say it was a war of Northern aggression against the South. And some students learn about lost cause ideology, basically saying that the South fought for ideals that were nobler than just slavery. They fought for states' rights. And it kind of just, you're kind of whitewashing the history a little bit, but sometimes that's how it's taught in the South. So you, Mr. Raz, you helped us get a balanced perspective of that in your class. And just touching on that, where do you think we, society, schools, should draw the line between offering alternative perspectives on things, like, for example, what's taught in the South about the Civil War sometimes, and things that just blatantly challenge reality? So where do you think we should draw the line? Because as you said, there's a lot of nuance in history, but that nuance can be exploited, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that is a difficult question, I think, because it's hard to know. I mean, there's curriculums that are designed on state levels with their state curriculums that individual states are supposed to follow. And then within those state curriculums, obviously teachers teach things kind of how they choose to teach them, and that can vary quite a bit. Um, it's difficult for me to know how to go about that, because even like it'd be very easy to me to say like, oh, you should only be able to teach facts or whatever. But like we could get into debates over what are the facts, and you could also, like I mentioned earlier, selectively choose which facts to teach that can heavily bias someone in a particular direction. And so it is tricky for me. I think what bothers me about some ways that certain schools and certain teachers have taught things is that sometimes they do teach them in ways that are just blatantly ahistorical, where they like blatantly non-factual. And an example you gave about some of the Southern curriculums, and I don't know if these are on a state level or this is an individual level, but I have met people who grew up in the South who I've talked to about history, who have told me like explicitly that this is how they learned the history. And I think how we choose to label events is important, right? Like, I mean, we learned in American history about, let's say, like the Boston Massacre, where these redcoats shot and killed a bunch of people in Boston. Like, I don't know because I don't know enough about British curriculum, but I wonder if that is even something they do teach. And if they do teach, it'd be interesting to see how they covered it. They probably wouldn't call it the Boston Massacre, you know, maybe they would, but like maybe they might call it something else, you know, because it's the framing of how you label an event affects how you think about it. And so these are tricky things. Like, I don't know. It's very difficult to say I can draw a line on like how teachers should teach things or how curriculum should be developed. I would just err towards trying to look at various perspectives and trying to use primary sources and like actual evidence to back up what you have to say. Like the thing about the lost cause ideology, which is like a very specific ideological construct that emerges in Reconstruction after the Civil War, is that it is based on things that just aren't historically true. And so in that sense, I don't know, like uh, it's hard for me to say that that should ever be incorporated into a curriculum as like the main way of understanding the events when it just isn't grounded in history. Like, and for people that don't know about what Jim was talking about and what I'm now talking about, is that basically post Civil War, the South intentionally kind of reframed what the Civil War was about in from their perspective and changed it. And the reason why we know it's a change is that you can look at primary source documents about what Southern leaders were saying at the very beginning of the Civil War and even before the Civil War started and then during the war. And then you can look at what they're saying right after, and it's not the same thing. And so they've essentially rewritten their own perspectives on it, on what it was about and what it meant. And it was done to try to create more favor for the Confederacy in terms of what it fought for. But but it's based on an ahistorical perspective, and I feel like you can still have a certain level of appreciation for certain aspects of history. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having an appreciation for Southern history, and I have a lot of appreciations for Southern history. But but I think doing this thing where you just kind of lie about what was true is very concerning to me. And and for me, like if you just read the primary source documents, it's very easy to kind of refute these beliefs. Like, and I think I showed some of that in class too. Is that you can actually read the secession documents, like the actual documents that the different states gave that explain their reasons for seceding, and it's in the documents itself. It says like the Southern leaders are not ambiguous about it. They say that we are seceding in part to protect the institution of slavery. And again, I don't think we have to moralize about this. We don't have to say that all of Southern people were bad. It doesn't mean every Southern citizen was bad. It doesn't mean some Southern citizens fought for other reasons too. It doesn't mean we have to believe that everyone from the South then and now are evil intrinsically or something. Like, no, it's not a moral category. It's just a historical reality, and we can learn from that, and we can learn and build upon that. Um, and I think some people do get into these kind of prideful things that kind of they then want to entrench their beliefs that they already have, and I find that concerning. And so I think we have to be open to hearing different perspectives. We have to look at primary sources. So I don't know. It's hard to draw an exact line, is my point. But I would say things that are explicitly not true based on historical documentation. It's like, come on. Like, I'm even okay with people trying to argue there were other reasons for the Civil War because there were, but if you just leave out slavery as one of them, it's just actually not true on any level. Like it's kind of that one is huge annoyance to me. You can even argue that the North was not fighting to get rid of slavery initially, which is true. That's absolutely true. They were fighting to just restore the Union. But to say that the war had nothing to do with slavery makes no sense. Like
And that kind of, there's a very fine line between a lie and a truth in history, because there are always different two sides, if not more, to every story. So if you give undue influence to one side of the story, that's just how you tread these nuances in history. On to the engineering aspect of this episode.
I think a lot of people also think that engineers are like just good at math, and just engineering is about solving problems, mechanics, all that type of stuff. But Franz, from your perspective, what do you think it actually means to think like an engineer?
Like if you're going to be a professional engineer and take your test, you're going to take your PE, and you're going to swear to a code of ethics for engineering, which is outstanding. Which I love that. So I don't know if students realize that to get your professional engineering certificate, you do that. So I love that. One other thing I love about engineering is it apolitical. I don't have to worry about my bias, my historical context. And I'm not trying to slam any of the history stuff. I don't worry about that stuff. I don't need to, because what I do is I try to identify problems, and that's what engineers do is did we even identify the right problem, the correct problem? Because a lot of times, and you've learned this in robotics, we think we know what the problem is with the mechanical system. Um, and we may go solve that problem. And then we realize, oh, that wasn't even the problem, and I caused a new problem. Right. So really thinking like an engineer, you want to be curious. You really have to understand the problem. Like it's 70% of the work is identifying the correct problem. Um, for me, for thinking like an engineer, and we misdiagnose problems a lot. The other beauty of engineering is I don't have to be emotional, right? I can be objective, and and I know a lot of people like we get to solve problems that affect society. And I don't know, and I would maybe refer to Raz, is this the most comfortable time in history that we've lived? I don't know. I mean, that's a question. Like if you look around for the masses, like we're identifying lots of problems now. Um, Power and energy is coming big. It's going to be big. We want to live how we want to live. We want to be comfortable. We're very comfortable now for the most part. I know not the whole world is, right? I know there are pockets that are not, and those are areas for problem where we can identify those social problems too that make a difference, like the Kenya Water Project. When we could go in and clean water, um, they're used to that in their lifestyle in Kenya, and we visited. Um, People get sick from drinking bad water, and it's a normal thing. Um, why is that problem not solved? You know, those are the social things. Those are the bigger things. Those things could be more emotional. For me, one thing that I love to do is keep my opinion out of things. I try to, you know, and I'm always curious about the other side too. It's like, okay. And we mentioned earlier, like potentially, some books being banned or not banned. And it's like, why? I see both sides. Is the internet good? Is the internet bad? I think we know it's both, right? Um, So, to answer your question, I'm being curious now. I'm trying to learn from all of you, right? And I'm forming my own opinion where your biases are at, right? And you are of me as well, and we're learning from each other. And I think this is a great conversation. I'm happy to be part of it. But for an engineer, it's problem identification. And then engineers are trained formally in advanced math and science, of course. So you're going to take calculus 1, 2, 3, differential equations, boatloads of physics, specialty, other coursework, depending on your interest area. But for an engineering mindset, it's what's the problem? It's 70%. If you identify that correctly, you're on the right track.
There's a lot of emphasis on the problem for sure. Isabella and I, we met and ultimately started this podcast at the Impactful Sandbox summer program, and we learned something called design thinking. Now, when I think about engineering, just viscerally, like an image of CAD software or math formulas pops into my head. But really, it's a framework that can be applied to society, and that's what design thinking aims to do. So Isabella, you want to go through the steps with it? I'll start us off. So in design thinking, we first emphasize the humans that are affected by the problem. Their experiences, motivations, daily challenges.
Right? And then for the second one, we define the problem as simple as possible.
Yeah. And then third, ideate creative solutions from diverse perspectives.
The fourth one is
Oh, go ahead.
generating. Oh, go ahead, Franz.
No, you guys are talking about the process, which comes right after the
Right.
problem, which is actually
Fourth,
carry on.
yeah.
Yes, and then it's generating concepts and then actually making the actual prototype, so mini versions of the actual solution.
Yeah. And then fifth, test the prototypes. So you want to rapidly iterate and find out where the prototypes fail or where they need adjustment. And Isabella actually mentioned that in her class, you use something called engineering design concept, which is pretty similar. Now, Mr. Franzenburg, I'll open it up to you. How do you teach students to apply the fail and iterate mindset to messy, like even social problems without getting discouraged by the complexity?
Yeah, I mean, so um, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. How do
The iterate
we apply the fail and iterate mindset to social problems?
So our biggest thing in the room is like, I want to fail fast and often so we can get to that iterative process, because your first solution just doesn't usually cut it. We may think that we have it figured out. Um, Now engineers in the professional world are paid to not make those mistakes to save their company's money. Let's, be real about that. Um, but for us, it's like we got to fail fast, and we applaud failure. Um, Obviously, companies are going to do the same thing depending on what they're working on. And it depends on the engineer's job. I knew there was a statistic, and I don't have AI. I'm not going to use AI on this, but it was like ago. I think the most CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies are engineers. Engineers do shape the future. They do work in societal, other human problems. Because I did mention, I'm not trying to be too contradictory here, of eliminating motion. It's once you understand the problem and the process and you can have that objective is really nice. So I really like that. It's okay to be emotional too. We're all human beings. So it does depend on which problem you're working on. And it's not always a product, like a physical, tangible, I can hold that product. We engineer systems all the time, and there's a type of engineering for anything that you're interested in. I have a student that is at Purdue right now, and she wants to, design amusement park rides and gadgets and things like that. How do I do this? So they have a mechatronics degree there. And then I just saw her back for a graduation. She's like, well, I'm also studying environmental science because I need to know how all of the things in the music park will interact with the environment too, and how important it is, and all the power systems and things too. So there can be very complex, I keep saying that, but problems. But to iterate, it's nice to have different perspectives in your team,
Of course.
see what someone else is thinking. When it's hard, is when we run out of time and you have to take the product to market and it's not ready. And you have to make decisions, and people's feelings will be hurt. You have to go one way or the other. We're out of time. So the faster you fail, the better, in my opinion, of that iterative process.
So, Mr. Franz, you touch upon the emotional aspect and the human aspect of engineering a lot. Uh, in my school, in my engineering class, we've actually been doing a lot of human centered design and just learning,
Yes.
reading different books about that, and trying to really figure out what customers want, what do clients want, what do they need, and kind of also incorporating psychology into this too. And I'm just curious, did this play like a significant role in your work in Kenya when you were designing the water filtration systems? And
Yeah, 100%. Human-centered design is definitely at the forefront of engineering and your problem identification, and that's sort of where some of the emotion comes from. But in Kenya, we thought we knew what the problem was, and what our biggest problem was communication. Straight out the gate, we speak from national origins some different languages, It was hard to communicate. We purchased testing equipment and sent it over there so we could, before we could go there, identify the problem. And what we realized was, like the testing equipment we sent was just based on water characteristics, for example, and we gave it to the local government there. And they we taught them, we made videos, we taught them how to run the test. They do the test, they come back, they're like, we passed the test, the water's good to drink. We're like, whoa, we haven't tested for bacteria. We just want to learn about the water. And so then they were like, yeah, this is all good. And like, no, we need to get them an incubator, right? Well, to test for bacteria, you have to keep it at a certain temperature, right? For 24 hours. Well, Kenya's hot. They didn't have power there. We had to like purchase or help, and we pitched in some money. They did have some solar panels that ran a pump to the water tower, but very limited power. So we had to figure out how to get. I hope you're understanding where I'm going with this from a human-centered design aspect. It's like we thought we kept knowing the problem. It's like, oh no, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. So communication was the biggest issue straight the whole time through. And then we started to figure that out. So then we needed to get him an incubator. Long story short, here I'm going to cut to the chase, but to control that temperature and to diagnose if there's bacteria there. We couldn't send it there because of certain taxes, governmental restrictions, and what you can bring in. They had to purchase it there. They had to go get it. Then we had to learn how to power it. So we also were talking to people we had access to and not just everyone on the ground. So what we realized was we had to get over there and see what was going on as well and interact with the people, human to human. We just take it from our client because our communication wasn't working 100% throughout. So human-centered design is everything. It's like we were designing for their needs. We also didn't know we couldn't give them an American standard pretty much to clean the water. We had to use materials there because then they have other wells they want to go to and implement the system. And we can't do it all. We had to start training people to do that. So the first system's online. It's working well. We're trying to hand it off. And it's been a difficult one. It's overall a success, but it took multiple years. So we found a problem that the kids could buy into, but it took multiple years. So then you're like, passing off the work, right? As you're going through this. It wasn't just as quick and easy as I'm going to go to Menards, or I don't know what your Home Depot maybe.
Yeah.
Water cleaning system, and I can just power that and put it in the tank and clean the water. We had to get them local materials as well, understanding what they had available to them. So human-centered design is essential. Yes.
You talk about
it's interesting how, or I'll finish my thought. It's interesting how like there's like a whole laborious phase of after designing it to actually implement it in the target region, target audience. It's like I feel there's a lot of like bureaucracy and a lot of just really understanding the people you're trying to make your product for, right? And I was like watching a video the other day of there's like been up flares of Ebola in certain regions of Africa lately. And a lot of the natives in certain areas, they don't trust Western medicine and Western technology. Like when they're sick, they don't even want to go to their local UN hospital, UN shelter, whatever. They don't trust outside just medicine and technology because they think that's what caused the outbreaks in the first place. So there was a little bit of a mistrust in like science and technology. So even though there can be like really good solutions, you still have to sell it to the people you're trying to appeal to. So I feel like that's that's a process that also deals with history a little bit. And um, yeah, that's really necessitates a lot of human centered thought into the solutions being offered for uh, for people. Yeah.
I think also, kind of connecting back to that human design, just like you mentioned, Fan, there's also a lot of system thinking because just like the example of having to worry about power source, how having to worry about finances, having to worry about criteria, a lot of like small things can have that ripple effect. That one small gear can affect an entire machine. So how do you think young people can use engineering principles like what you've taught in ID and POV to tackle problems that actually seem bigger than themselves and how they can actually make, that bigger impact on society, leaving that footprint?
Um, well, I think it's experience. You got to jump in and do it. That's what we do with robotics. That's why it's so great. The game changes every year. The more times I go through the cycle of learning systems thinking, human centered design, design process, how to iterate, the more times you do it, it starts to become second nature. And you get to learn from, you got to find the experts. We weren't experts in any of those areas.
Mm.
We contacted, the city, water, Davenport Public Works, and they have a genius there that is cleaning the water for our whole entire city. Came out and started helping us.
Wow.
So finding the experts is key. It's your primary research. You have your secondary research. You know, to tackle the bigger problems, um, you sort of got to jump in. Kenya lends itself. And I started to think like, why is this problem not solved? And it's like, and this is a little heart wrenching on the side of being a human. It's like, there's no money in it.
Mm.
There's no big companies coming in there, putting in it, the system's in. So it's like, we can do this. But then we had to understand budget, finances. We were in way over our heads on it. Um, but and I told our client that, who's a missionary that went over there, um, and I was like, I don't know what kind of solution we're going to come up with a high school engineering firm with no engineering degrees.
High school.
We are trying to teach them engineering concepts.
Wow.
I said, I can't make any promises. I said, we're going to give it everything we got. And we did for multiple years before we're handing it off to them, and giving them a viable solution to clean the water. You have to put yourself out there and just dive in. To answer your question, Isabella, is like the people that solve these kind of problems, they don't sleep very well. They drink their atomic, which is what we have around here, their black coffee, and they don't rest until we find a solution to improve the lives of other people.
That reminds me of Blair Sadler. We interviewed him, Isabella, on a past episode, and he was a doctor, and his brother was a lawyer, and they basically partnered up to tackle a bunch of problems that they weren't actually specialized in. They didn't know what they were doing at first, but they met people who were either like in places of leverage or who were experts, and they ended up being able to achieve a great deal. They wrote the organ donation laws. They helped pioneer the 911 ambulance dispatching system. So many major accomplishments those two achieved without being experts from the start, but they became experts and they talked to people who knew what they were doing. Historians and engineers both try to understand systems, whether that's society, governments, or literal machines. Do you think that there are similarities in the way historians analyze the past and the way engineers solve problems?
It's an interesting question. A lot of the historians are specifically making arguments about the past. They're trying to understand the past and then make arguments about them, about what this means. And solving historical problems is also very difficult. And, as Francis also talked about, that there are there's obviously more subjectivity, I think, in terms of history versus engineering, where you're based on using mathematical concepts and scientific ideas to, address very specific problems. But I do think that process of critical thinking, of trying to address ideas and like kind of really thinking about them logically. I like to think of myself as a fairly logical person that likes to kind of break things down and do its constituent parts to try to understand it better. I imagine that's a similar kind of thinking that engineers are doing all the time. Um, and so I do see some similarities. And obviously, I think we can see how engineers might address social problems, and having a historical understanding can maybe have some overlap. I do know a decent amount of engineers actually. Like my dad is an electrical engineer, and I feel like my dad really instilled a lot of ideas about thinking logically in me as a kid. And I have huge disagreements with my dad on all sorts of things, but 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 we at least I feel like can talk to each other logically and think about things in a systematic way, which is kind of cool. And um, I would say I have another friend that I'm friends with who is an engineer who does a lot of interesting stuff with thinking about engineering in a more social context, about like how social factors affect engineering. So it's kind of interesting in that specific overlap of social and um, engineering, which is really interesting to me. I know very little about it in all honesty, so I can't really say too much myself. But uh, but he specifically is very interested in that specific topic, which I think is a really cool overlap between us. He would be very good at mediating that better, I think, because he is an engineer, but also is interested in the social elements of engineering. That's something he's starting to kind of get really into.
I think that's something we all need to kind of understand, like for the future. Being multidisciplinary is very important. You got to know how to synthesize knowledge, expertise from different fields in order to create new solutions. It's like uh, we can't all have everyone always specialize in one field anymore, because a lot of it is integrating, as you said, Mr. Raz, social elements with more scientific fields like engineering, right? So
Right, absolutely. It was great to combine these two perspectives that are different, differing fields. I think it's kind of what we do as students, where we bounce around between, math class, language class, history, and inherently we're a bit multidisciplinary and start to kind of make connections between how we can apply different subjects in a combined way. And it gets me thinking even perhaps as the job market shifts, maybe multidisciplinary skill sets will become more valuable. Kind of bring it together could be a new form of approaching problems.
exactly.
No, that's a great perspective, Jim and Shane. Um, I think you're definitely onto something. It's we need more of the what is it, the Renaissance people, Renaissance men,
Yeah.
so to speak. That's what I see out of one of my sons. He's like, we had the guitar for 6 months, and he still gets on it and strums it. We got the motorcycle. Now he's rock climbing all the time. He just built a skateboard deck. Um, got the car. It's what is he? I don't care what it is, as long as it's something he's passionate about and he's gaining experience in different areas. Um, and Raz, I thought I was going to be a history teacher.
Really?
Um, of history.
Yeah.
I also thought maybe I'd be a guidance counselor because you know I I mean I lost people in my life when I was young, some friends and things, and I wanted to make a difference. And I thought maybe that's what I could do. And then I realized, well, guidance counselors do a lot of scheduling and other stuff. They don't get to talk with people that are going through problems. They do. They do. Some do. You know, but what you guys are saying is it I think you expose yourself and your listeners, your viewers to as much as you can, take in as many experiences as you can, because it will allow you to solve more problems and think more critically. Um, and just find the primary source, like who's really going through the problem, that human centered design aspect, you know. Um,
Yeah.
they know what's going on the most. The boots on the ground know what's going on the most, and that's who you want to talk to.
It's funny that you mentioned that you wanted to be a history teacher, because I initially wanted to be a scientist, actually. My undergrad, I was initially a biochemistry major and I switched. So it is kind of funny, the weird
Yeah.
parallel there, that we both started kind of interested in the opposite and switched over.
Yes. Yes.
I love how just two different perspectives are still like very interconnected. I think we've learned a lot about just you guys as teachers, teaching methods, and just kind of different perspectives on how we view society and how different things or different backgrounds can definitely, make that impact.
Yeah, I think a common thread in our conversation is just to remain intellectually curious, remain open to other perspectives. And we can do so a lot of the time through a conversation like what we're doing now. And that we can really understand some of the problems that affect people in the real world and uh, how different people view different things. And I think that's just very valuable in the world we live in today.
100%. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would applaud you guys. I don't mean to cut you off at all, Shane, too, but just for you guys doing this is very impressive. I had no idea what to expect here, but I've had a great experience. I've learned a lot, a little bit about each of you, and had a pleasure speaking with Raz too.
Definitely.
But you guys having the conversations is what we need to be doing. So I applaud you for that.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. What a great second episode of our second season. And we'll be back with another episode on real world developments and the student's role. Thank you for listening to
The
To
voices
voices
of
of impact.
We hope you enjoyed the Voices of Impact podcast, where we engage in spirited discourse on the world's most pressing issues with the goal to discover and implement solutions.
Our mission is to overcome global and societal conundrums through student unification, accepting our roles as future stewards of planet Earth. Please consider sharing this episode with other humans to enable spirited youth discourse on the planet's most pressing issues.
If you learned something or felt empowered by this episode, tune in Saturdays for more student-led change-making conversations, and be sure to follow, share, and positively rate our show.
Voices of Impact is brought to you by the University of San Diego's Jacobs Institute for Innovation in Education, PPC Profit Pros, and Schoolcast, a Cloudcast media program to empower the voices of young students around the world.